Bem-vindos à Sociedade das Nações, um programa sobre a atualidade internacional, aqui na SIC Notícias, e hoje sem o Martim Cabral. Houve, há poucos dias, uma reunião importante, a 33ª da chamada Comissão Permanente Bilateral, que trata do Acordo de Defesa e Cooperação entre Portugal e os Estados Unidos a propósito da base das Lajes. E também a propósito disso, decidimos hoje refletir um pouco sobre o chamado laço estratégico permanente entre Lisboa e Washington, que acabou por vir ao de cima no meio destas conversações. E temos, digamos, o co-presidente desta comissão, o embaixador Bob Sherman. Hello, thank you again for coming.
It's my pleasure. It's nice to see you again.
Thanks. If you would describe the climate that surrounded the conversations on Lajes, what would you say? Was it a positive climate? Do you think that things are going well, bad, and for whom?
I think that what the climate was the search and something that we found, which is a way forward on the issue of the base. That the fact is that the strategic relationship between the United States and Portugal transcends decades and encompasses a lot more than Lajes. Unfortunately, that has been the focus of so much of the attention these days, but does not define the breadth and depth of the relationship between our two countries.
Would you say that the Portuguese government? Were you surprised as a co-chairman of the Commission by the stress that we put on trying to save jobs and the economy of Azores involved in this or not? Were you surprised by that or?
I don't think so. I think certainly I understand that the notion of people losing their jobs is something that's very difficult to absorb. The United States is very sensitive to that. I think that we are focused, as a matter of fact, on helping with economic development and job creation in the Azores. And I think that broadening those opportunities for the people of the Azores is something that's important. In this sense, it's not a good thing for people to be dependent on one employer, whether that employer is Microsoft, whether that employer is EDP, or whether that employer is the United States military. So that people have adequate options and adequate opportunities is something that we are striving to do together with the regional government and the central government.
So what you're telling me is that in the economic development terms, you try to do something with us and with Azores to make them less dependent on the base.
Absolutely. This is something that we started well before this meeting. We have been talking with the regional government. We have been sharing ideas. Obviously, what will work in the Azores needs to be determined by the people in the Azores. But we are committed to helping and assisting and bringing the kinds of expertise that we have in the United States to increase the availability of jobs and increase the economic development in the islands.
Of course, all of this has to do with money, with financing. Nothing is done with, unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know, without money. You pay something like per year, I think, around 100 million US dollars investing in Lajes, probably with the so-called downsizing or streamlining, as you say now. You're going to pay 40 million or something, if I have the numbers right, or if my sources are right. You think that there is going to be a way of the United States, through enterprises, through the help of central government or regional governments, to do something to bridge that gap, to try to make Azores like develop, I don't know, new enterprises, strategic partnerships, more education for Azorians as Portuguese citizens. Do you have any concrete idea on this?
I think that the notion of development has to come from the people of the Azores. I've heard talk about increasing tourism to the Azores. I've heard talk about perhaps innovation and entrepreneurship coming to the Azores. I think that the starting point in those discussions has to be what's right for the Azorean people. And then we need to broaden the discussion to include the kinds of things that the United States can add to that. We have investors in the United States. We have access to capital in the United States. We have a broad array of businesses. But it will only work if there's a business case to be made on the islands. And so what I'm hoping for is...
What you mean by a business case? So the Azoreans should propose themselves things, or they should not wait for you? I mean, they should propose things.
I think there should be a collaborative effort, but I don't think the United States can say to the Azores, this is the kind of business that you should have on the island. That's dependent on what the expertise of the people is. That's dependent on what the focus of the people are. And I think that once that happens, the United States can assist with developing and expanding and making those ideas happen. But people will not invest, businesses in the United States will not invest unless there's a business case to be made. And I think that what's happened in the past is some of these discussions have been stuck based on a hope that what happens on the base will be different. This is good for the Azores, irrespective of the numbers on the base.
During the discussions in this commission, for the first time in lots of years, we had also the president of the government of Azores speaking. You had people from your State Department, from your Defense Department involved. You brought a big delegation, like, I don't know, 20 people or 22 people that dealt with lots of things. Does it mean that for the United States, the permanent link with Portugal, or a strategic link, or what you want to call it, involves everyone in the United States government?
I think what it means, and let me tell you about the delegation. We had representatives of the White House. We had representatives of our African command, of our European command, representatives of the Air Force, our Department of Commerce, our Department of Homeland Security, our Department of State, and our Department of Defense, among others. I think what this shows is that there is a broad strategic relationship with Portugal that can be built upon. And that strategic relationship is not just simply what's happening at Lajes. We had the opportunity to talk in areas such as cybersecurity. We had the opportunity to talk in the law enforcement arena about some of the things that we are doing together, as well as, I think, a major initiative that we can undertake together, which is focused on maritime security in the Gulf of Guinea.
But most of those things, or lots of those things, are already, as you know, planned. We've been cooperating for ages on lots of those things. Is there something really new that you could say?
I just mentioned the maritime security in the Gulf of Guinea. That absolutely is new. And let me tell you what that's about. That takes advantage of a security need in the world that the U.S. has identified and the expertise that the Portuguese have. In the Gulf of Guinea, we're seeing piracy, we're seeing drug trafficking, we're seeing fishing rights disputes, terrorism, and the like. It's a problem source of the world. And what the United States understands is the Portuguese have more expertise in that area than we do. So why not partner together to address a specific need of the 21st century? So what we're talking about is setting up a Center for Maritime Security here in Lisbon under the lead of the Portuguese, which the United States is willing to support. And I can tell you, I have traveled to Germany. I've talked to the commanders in our African command, in our European command. I've talked to high-level people in the Pentagon. And I know that the Secretary of Defense has also made a commitment that that's something that the U.S. and Portugal can do together to address a real need at a critical time in the security of the world.
Before this interview, I was checking our logs on the planes that land in Portugal, everywhere from north to south of Portugal to the islands, Madeira, Azores, etc. And besides American planes, we have all NATO countries that are flying over Azores, and that, for instance, the Canadians have a big presence. So I would say that I will ask you if the Azores thing is not only a big NATO issue, not only a bilateral thing.
I think the issue with the Azores is this, that the security needs of the world have changed from 70 years ago when the presence on Lajes was first established. The threats of the world are now moving east and south. If you look at the hotspots of the world, they're in Eastern Europe, they're in the Middle East, and they're in Africa. And the United States needs to align its military presence with where those threats are. So we need to be moving to be closer to those threats, and that's what we have decided to do. You look at the issue of personnel. This is something the United States has done over the course of time. We used to have 500,000 military personnel in Europe 20 years ago, at the time of where the biggest threat was nuclear war with the Russians. Now we have 12% of that, 60,000 people in all the European countries. So the notion of having a nimble and flexible military to not only keep the United States safe, but to answer the security demands of the world is something we're focused on.
Just to close, so to speak, the chapter on Azores, and a last thing. We know there's going to be an extraordinary or supplementary meeting in Washington around May or June, before summer. What do you expect from that meeting? I mean, is it like a less resource meeting to solve a problem, or you don't think there is a problem?
No, I think that the decision has been made, and the decision has been made based on the military needs of the United States and the requirement of security in the world.
Who defines those needs?
The United States defines the needs.
I know, but inside of the United States, you think it's like a Pentagon decision? Is it a state decision or a bipartisan decision? Is it an executive decision?
Well, it's certainly within the executive. The military decides. Initially, the military needs, but we report to civilian commanders. So there is that dialogue that exists between our Pentagon and the White House. Congress obviously has a role to play as well, but it's Congress that instructed our Pentagon to take a look at the military needs and actually right-size, I'll use that word, right-size our forces in light of what our operational needs are. I think that in this extraordinary meeting that's scheduled to take place in the next several months, we can talk about the implementation of the decision in a way that's the most humane in light of what our requirements are and what law requires for the citizens of the Azores. We're not tone deaf to the fact that this will have a negative impact, and we want to try to moderate that as best we can.
Do you think that old ideas like, for instance, stationing in Azores, a training base for your Air Force, it was suggested in the past for the F-22s, for the F-35s, and new generation fighters, probably certain entities in Portugal at that time didn't recognize the importance of that, and we lost that opportunity. But you think that opportunities like this could, again, be on the table or not?
I think we don't know what the future lies. I think that the one thing in the world that we can't change is geography. It's important for us to have a presence in the Azores, that in the future, if there are opportunities that come about, I think people would be open to looking at them. But for right now, based on what our needs are currently, this is the right size to address the operational needs.
If by any chance there is an agreement where you would support parts of our economy or industry or even the armed forces in saving money, you would not attach any strings to us in reinvesting that money in Azores, right?
I think the answer is if
these are two sovereign states, right?
Yeah, if we are helping Portugal save money, Portugal must make the decision with how it allocates its money. And should the central government decide to allocate more of that money to Azores, that's an internal decision with of Portugal that we have no real say in.
When I talk to generals in NATO, American generals, admirals, they all look at the map, they see Portugal, they see what they call the SLOCs, the sea lanes of communication, and they say, okay, Portugal in a sense is vital because of the big dimension of the sea under its responsibility in protecting those slocks. And the slocks have to do with the American economy, with the boats that pass, with the ships full of oil. So it has to do with not only with Portugal, it has to do with international security. Do you think that people in Washington understand that importance of Portugal in protecting the stability of a whole region?
I think they certainly do, and I think that's one of the reasons why you saw the broad-based delegation come out here representing everybody from the White House to the military and everybody in between. It is not because no one had anything else to do with their time. They came out here because there is a real need to engage with Portugal on issues of mutual concern in an attempt to make sure that the safety of the world is secured and that we advance on a military front and on an economic front the kinds of initiatives that will accomplish that.
Let's change to another subject, totally different one. We are having too many crises at the same time in the world. We have like the ISIS crisis, we have the Ukraine crisis, we have like the southern flank of NATO crisis. I mean, there are lots of things collapsing at the same time or transforming themselves at the same time. One question that has been put on the table is what is the position, the exact position of the Obama administration regarding the possible military aid to Ukraine in so-called defensive weapons? I mean, what would you say is the real voice of Washington in this?
I think the answer is that the Obama administration and my government are keeping all options open. But I think it's important, and as you recognize, that the talk is about not offensive weapons, but defensive weapons. President Putin, his objectives are pretty well defined, I think, at that point. One is to deny Ukraine its own voice in its future. Two is to try to split apart NATO, and third is to try to split apart the EU. What we believe is that there is no military solution in Ukraine. What the military can do is to provide the time and space for a political solution to develop. So if we were to proceed down that path of providing defensive weapons, it's in an attempt to create that kind of time and space for a political solution.
When we talk about defensive weapons, we are talking about what exactly?
And an anti-tank weapon, as an example, would be the kind of thing. It's not a Stinger missile, it's an anti-tank missile.
So if need be, the Ukrainians are asking you more than 1,000 Javelin missiles, that would be one thing.
Well, again, going into what the details are, I'm not privy to the exact discussions of which weapons or not. But certainly defensive weapons to help thwart the kind of aggression, Russian-backed aggression that's going in the Ukraine, to give the kind of space that I talked about for a political solution.
But you have to recognize that from an external observer, when we see sometimes let's say the gimmicks of the White House and Washington and Congress, sometimes we don't know exactly who is who. I mean, because Secretary Kerry said that his personal opinion on this matter is one. And then you see President Obama sometimes stating the political position you said, but nothing looks like very defined or concrete. You think there is a division inside of Washington on what to do, or a certain indecision on uncertainty?
I don't think that at all. I think that that's one of the strengths of our country, which is that we approach very complicated problems from different perspectives. And I think that what we've been able to do is come together as a government. I think that one of the successes about what's happening with Ukraine is the fact that the United States and the EU have found common ground on the issue of sanctions. It's not because we think identically to the EU or even that countries within the EU think identically, but we have found a way to come to a common ground for the purposes of imposing sanctions on Russia. So I think the fact that there are diverse opinions on complicated issues is not surprising, and at the end, our government will speak with one voice.
If you go back and look at the two mandates of President Obama, I mean, did he make the world more secure and safer, or you think he created the seas of instability?
No, I think clearly the world is safer under President Obama. I think that what we have done is we've decimated the core of Al-Qaeda. Osama bin Laden, the fact that he has been eliminated makes the world safer in and of itself. The fact that we've put together a 60-nation coalition to fight ISIS is advancing the safety and security of the world. The fact that we are leading in the response to Russian aggression in Ukraine is another example. The world is a complicated place. There's no question about that. But I think what President Obama has managed to do is not only to engage in leadership, but to engage in smart leadership, which requires a coalition of allies with common interests.
Today it's a different program. Before letting you go, you're going to be subjected to an old form of torture, which I always suggest some books at the end. These are Portuguese books. Are you reading something interesting these days? Is there anything that you've been like... that rings a bell? I mean, is there anything interesting that
I will say two things. I am working heavily on my Portuguese because there's a book on the rise of ISIS and the Islamic State that I believe that you wrote, which I happen to have a copy of, and I'm looking forward to being able to read it in Portuguese.
Yeah, I hope you like it. Well, this is about Murphy's Law. If lots of things can be wrong at the same time, they will one day. So it's more about statistics. But although Murphy's Law is not so well understood, but this is a book in Portuguese about Murphy's Law from Arthur Bloch, called in Portuguese A Lei de Murphy e Outras Razões para as Coisas Correrem Mal. This is only the first volume. I wonder why they need 2 volumes for this. Another one is from a known historian, anthropologist, sociologist called Jared Diamond, Armas, Germes e Aço. It's why humanity destroys itself cyclically and why it is always why you see a rebirth. I mean, like, so you have like sickness, you have like wars, etc. But the miracle of civilization is that we always jumped from a bad situation to a better one. I mean. And the last one, it's not the one before the last, the role of diplomacy and soft power in combating terrorism. These are the proceedings of a conference that took place in Turkey. Your Secretary of State was present.
Yes.
This is published by the Center of Strategic Research, which is a Turkish institution, and these are the proceedings. It's a very small thing, but I guess that they discussed a lot, but that's well summarized. And the last one from Maria José Lencastre, Com Sonho na Bagagem, one of the best known playwrights from Italy called Luigi Pirandello, that was a master of creating. Pirandello is a guy that says, okay, we have a table, 4 persons are looking at the same table, they have 4 different stories about the table, okay? So he was a bit of a master of the subjective perspective. This is called Com Sonho na Bagagem, when Pirandello passed through Lisbon and lived a bit here. And at the end, do you like jazz?
I love jazz.
Okay, but you are more on the mainstream thing, or you like experiments, or?
No, I like rock and roll. I like jazz. I have broad taste in music.
Okay, this is from a great saxophone player, American one. Chris Potter is one of the best guys from the avant-garde, but very melodic. This is called. He has an orchestra now called the Underground Orchestra, and this is called Imaginary Cities. And he tries to describe like future cities or past cities through music. And the first composition is called Lament. It's very good. It starts with a cello. It's very mellow. And I thank you for your patience.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.